Can I have a motion to start the meeting, please? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Representative Darrell Elam, would you make a word of prayer for us, please?
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this tremendous privilege that we have of serving our citizens and serving the great state of Georgia. Now we pray for wisdom and guidance as we do this meeting to make decisions in honor of our citizens and our state. And this we ask in thy holy name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. We appreciate everybody coming today. There's a couple things that we want to talk about. This first thing is installation visits, invite resolutions, and meetings. I think we've had two so far, Fort Gordon and Moody Air Force Base. I think they both went very, very well. And just wanted to see where we are on the progress of the other two. Representative Williams?
Chairman, proud to announce March the 6th, 3rd ID, Major General Rainey, his Command Sergeant Major, his garrison commander and leadership of Fort Stewart Hunter Army Airfield.
Very good. Thank you very much. So that's the 6th of March. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, very good. That's excellent. And Robbins Air Force Base is trying to get that 3-star to come down. General Levy, hoping to hear something from Representative Shaw Blackman about that. The second thing I want to talk about is very briefly is the USG and TCSG Day. The 21st of February is not next week, but the week after. That's probably going to be our biggest meeting, in my opinion, one of the biggest meetings, because we're going to have the military affairs people from the U.S. University System of Georgia and the military affairs liaisons from the technical schools who have won awards. And if you look at one of the pages here, sorry, on the one of the briefs here is we really have some amazing amounts. The University of Georgia was the very top rated university among top tier research universities. Armstrong was number 4 overall, the whole nation. Georgia State was number 7. Albany University was number 8. The UGA won number 42 for all, and Augusta University also did very, very well at 112. Among military-friendly technical colleges, Savannah Tech was won the award for the entire United States of America, and followed by Wiregrass at number 13, number 19 Gwinnett Tech, and number 25 Central Georgia Tech. So we're going to talk to them about what we can do to hopefully to promulgate those best practices throughout the other universities and technical schools, and also what they can do to hopefully to drill down to what we can do for K-12 in the same way. The third thing I want to talk about is the Georgia National Guard Day. It's going to be the 14th of March, so we'll be doing a meeting on that day as well, and that's for the Guard and Air National Guard and Air Reserve Guard here in Georgia. Any questions about those items? Right now, I'm just on the agenda right now. Okay. Number 4 item is Moody Air Force Base. I'd like Mr. Hanson to come up to the podium, sir, and talk to us about Moody Air Force Base. Of course, was the very first when we went to the Robbins Air Force Moody Air Force Base joint meeting, and we've done a lot of stuff after that, so we wanted to see what Moody Air Force Base has to say after reading our report, and anything else we could do for you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's certainly a pleasure to be back with you today. I had the opportunity to present to you back in your first meeting in Warner Robins, and first want to thank you for your willingness to participate in this process, to actually go around our state and listen to your military installations and commit yourself to doing what you can as a state to help with issues in our state. So thank you very much for that. And today I do want to update you on a couple of things. I also want to mention that General Mark Welch, who recently retired as Chief of Staff of the Air Force, he was your speaker at the biennial this year. And that's actually because of his relationship with Moody Air Force Base and our long-standing relationship with him. And I think you all saw what kind of men and women are serving in our Air Force. He was a very inspirational speaker. I was there to hear him that day as well. And I know I've heard much positive feedback about that. Also want to, my friend Representative Williams here, it was really good to see him after the Moody presentation this morning. He's accustomed to being surrounded by green, but he took a photo with guys all dressed in blue today, and that says a lot about him. So an old Army guy to come and share with those Air Force guys is appreciated. So let me tell you what's going on with Moody. Moody is doing very well. You all heard the economic impact numbers, the job numbers. You're aware from previous reports. Moody's stable. Moody is A-10 mission. The Air Force has extended that mission now till somewhere between 2025 and 2030. Yeah, this mic keeps cutting out. I'm not sure why. So the A-10s will be around. There was a threat for a long period of time that those were going to be removed from the Air Force, retired. So that's not the case now. We continue to have the search and rescue missions. We continue to have other training missions. For the last 3 years, we've been training Afghan pilots at Moody Air Force Base so that they can go home and defend their country. We will now be training, have a group of pilots and maintainers from Lebanon that will arrive this month that will be doing training to do the very same thing. So Moody has found a niche in the Air Force to help train foreign pilots and aircraft and train maintainers so that they can go home and better defend and protect their own country. Moody competed for a recent mission that we unfortunately did not receive. It was for an RPA mission, remotely piloted aircraft. That mission ultimately went to Shaw Air Force Base. We know Moody scored very well. We were disappointed, but then again, there are other opportunities we're going to be competing for. In fact, sometime this spring, the Air Force will be doing a review of pre-qualified bases to look at relocating some F-16s. Primarily from Hill Air Force Base, where they now have many of the new F-35s. So there'll be a number of bases that will be evaluated. The initial criteria say that somewhere from 16 to 32 to 48 F-16s will be relocated to 1 or 2 bases. So Moody will at least have an opportunity to compete and be evaluated for that mission. That is a mission we've had before at Moody, so it'd be a very nice fit, very complementary with the A-10s and the other missions that Moody has. So that you understand, Moody's mission is vital. Search and rescue, where there's conflict in the world, Moody is typically there. They've been in constant deployment since the beginning of the first Gulf War. You heard the story this morning of Colonel Kunkel, a hero himself, who went in his helicopter with his crew and actually rescued a downed pilot who is now the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force, General Goldfein. It's a tremendous story, but it really is a true story to tell you what those men and women do each and every day. And we were pleased to have 2 staff sergeants there with us today, one of who was the Airman of the Year for the entire United States Air Force, and she's stationed at Moody. So Moody will continue to have opportunities. As we have a new administration and new leadership in the Pentagon and elsewhere, there's a lot of discussion about a BRAC. Most people believe there will be one. Many believe it could be as soon as 2019. Most of the branches of the military believe they have about 30% excess capacity. So they believe that there is a need in order to free up resources to buy new equipment, to buy more modern aircraft. You heard Colonel Kunkel this morning talk about the age of their equipment. That's the one way they see they can free up funds in order to replace that equipment and get the newest equipment is by removing some excess inventory that the Air Force and all branches have said that they have. So we believe there will be another BRAC, and we believe Moody has a lot of strengths. Every base obviously has to be prepared, and theoretically every base is at risk, so it's certainly nothing you can take for granted. Moody has a lot of strength. It has dual runways. It's on the East Coast. It has multiple missions. It's quickly deployed to where conflict is in the world. Being on the East Coast, it owns its own bombing range next door. It owns another range at Avon Park in Florida. It has assets at Nellis Air Force Base that it owns and other bases. So Moody is a strong base. But we're also going to do everything we can to be prepared. So what are some of the things that you could perhaps help us with? You recall I discussed broadband. Rural broadband. I also testified before that broadband study committee about the need around Moody Air Force Base. There's a lot of housing out there of military families, and yet the broadband capability is very poor and has been identified by the Air Force and others as a quality of life issue. And so it's something that we together need to find a way to address in rural Georgia, and particularly, as I understand it from your committee report, it came up in practically every military hearing that you had. And so we'd certainly like to explore ways. We've been working hard to get private sector interest in that. We've made some inroads, but certainly some kind of investment. I know there's some discussion of bills being dropped on rural broadband, some kind of incentives that would encourage private sector investment, or some kind of partnership with the state to provide some backbone fiber so that private carriers could then take that the last mile and serve customers would be needed. I gave that broadband study committee 6 human stories, not superficial stories, but 6 human stories out of probably 30 or 40 I have about military families and how they're affected by the lack of broadband in their homes that are in nice, dense neighborhoods where it would be an expectation that you would have. Land acquisition is something that the state could help with. Military bases, you have some risk when you have any kind of dense development around a base. So there's several pieces of land, one with a trailer park on it adjacent to the entrance to the base. We would love to have the help in acquiring that property and then turning it over to the federal government, the Department of Defense, to use for military purposes. There's a piece of land adjacent to the entrance to the base that actually backs up to the military housing, the officer housing, that really is could be a BRAC issue because it's a dense development near a military base. It's blight, it truly is, and it's a homeland security issue, and that it's private property owned literally immediately adjacent to all the officer housing. So that's the kind of thing that would be good for us to find a way to acquire and eliminate. And that particular piece of property, we've had an appraisal done on it. It appraised at about $825,000. So we're looking for ways and help and support to acquire that piece of property. It's a very nice piece of property. It would be a value added to the Air Force to have it and own it. We also have a piece of property on the south end of the base that we'd like to acquire because it would sort of be in the landing zone, and our base in Georgia, our base is the only base in Georgia without real alternative energy. So we've been working with some private providers who would have interest if we could acquire this about 100-acre piece of land at the southern end of a base, doing a large solar array on that land, and therefore they could provide alternative energy to Moody Air Force Base, which actually is expected to be sort of a value-added criteria in the next BRAC. So that's something that would be a real asset to have. And then additional land on the east side to expand the training missions. Moody has the security forces too that we talked about before, and they do a lot of training to prepare them for the environment that they're going to be in when they're deployed to Afghanistan or wherever the case may be. So, they need large areas of land to do on-the-ground training, bombs, everything they have to do when they're deployed. So a lot of that is not valuable land. It's very rural land. It could be acquired at a reasonable rate or even long-term leases. So we're looking at strategic ways to help support Moody for future growth and development on the east side, perhaps a solar project on the south end, and then to eliminate some blight and some density immediately adjacent to the base. So those are some initial thoughts I would have, Mr. Chairman, about ways that the state and this committee might try and help support our community and our base.
Thank you very much. Representative Clanton has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the presentation today. Let me ask you, in regards to the blighted property that you're talking
Right.
about around the base, is there an official proposal been drafted and a request, and if so, to whom?
We've been looking at where we can make that application. We have obviously we've had an appraisal done. We know it's on the property. We know the value of it. We know the benefit of eliminating that blight. We know potential uses of it. What we've not been able to find is that perfect grant application opportunity to where to submit that to try and get funding. We're looking at federal CDBG funding. There is a pool of CDBG funds, Community Block Development Grant funds, that are set aside for elimination of slum and blight. So obviously the federal funds have a little more rigorous long-term you know, how you can use the property, and you got to have it in the ownership of a local government for 20 years and so on and so forth. So we've got to figure out a way to see if we can work through some of those challenges. But that's a source that we're looking at, because it could be potentially $500,000 to $750,000 if we can make the criteria work. They're typically for communities, local governments, a city and a county. So in this case, that's how we've got to approach it, as a county being an applicant, but trying to acquire it on behalf of a future need of the Air Force.
Follow up? And that was where I was going next. If the state, so to speak, puts some skin in the game.
Right.
You mentioned in regards to turning it over to the federal government, or turning that property, because obviously if it's going to be Air Force, it's going to be.
Right.
Would it be developed by the feds, or?
Well, the Air Force actually has a new initiative. It's called P4, and they're
called what,
actually
sir?
P4,
Okay.
Public-Private Partnership. So it's where the federal government has recognized that there's opportunities to contract with one another, whether it be for services, or in our case, we've done that multiple ways already. So it's a legal mechanism approved by the Department of Defense. We have a stakeholders group. We meet quarterly with our base. We look at ways to help each other. For instance, our county is now operating the base's water and wastewater system under that P4 contract. Grassy Pond is a military installation, a large recreation area. Through that P4 contract, it's now been opened up to the public, so our citizens can go out and take use of that. We were contracting to provide staff for a library that was on the base. We're looking at E911 services under a contract, so that the county is also serving the base. So we're looking at a number of opportunities. This could be a P4 initiative, where you could use state or local money to acquire a piece of property, and then through this P4 have a lease agreement where you'd lease it back to the Air Force to use for, say, 20 years, and then at the end of the lease you deed it to them, essentially.
Thank you.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask you something. Mr. City Manager, tell me, have you all come up with a rough ballpark figure of what it will cost to supply broadband?
No, sir, we haven't, because that's a little bit of a moving target. And I was at a rural caucus meeting last week where the question was asked of one of the providers about it, and they were saying, well, some of that's proprietary information, so it's hard to get someone to give you those numbers. You know, to me, the most, and we're also looking at a program through another federal agency that has broadband grants, USDA. And to see if there's perhaps a loan we could get to put in some infrastructure and then contract with a private provider to then actually provide the service. I don't think any local government or the state wants to get into the service delivery business. What we want to do is help get the hard fiber there so that someone can take away their main cost, which is their main impediment to providing the service. So, you know, it'd be purely speculative, but I believe if you could get $1 million, you could really get some private sector companies interested in extending their infrastructure from where it is to serve those areas, to overcome the lack of density issue. See, running a city and having a water business and a sanitation business, I understand that you've got to have density to make the math work, to make a business model work. But getting some of that infrastructure in the ground would I think, relieve them of the need to have the same kind of density.
Follow, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
One of the things, we have the same problem. We're a semi-rural county in Liberty County, and it's military families that have been spread out along with civilian families. And we started out with the Board of Education, and we're expanding it. We literally built portable broadband.
Right.
We've stationed buses with broadband capabilities in these communities, and consequently the children now and families have access to broadband because our entire system, all of our students have iPads. So it was not as expensive.
Right.
And so we put the broadband capability out with the intention of eventually expanding it permanently.
Right.
But the school bus situation has been marvelous. We just put it in areas that's sparsely populated and move as needed, and it's worked good.
That is a very good idea to look into. you know, most military bases are a little out from the community, so Moody is 8 miles outside the city, several miles outside of the urban part of Lowndes County, and it's sort of situated really in sort of contiguous to Lanier County, Berrien County, and Lowndes County, with really purely rural area around it. The military housing is primary, which is privatized, would be those to benefit. So there just hadn't yet been the incentive or the willingness of a private provider to extend out to serve that area. But that is an idea, something. And also, you know, there's a federal standard for broadband, you know, to meet that standard is 25.3 upload, download, and some of the other alternatives, such as satellite, typically does not meet that. Some of the other antenna-based services do not meet that standard, and so we're trying to make sure we have something that will meet an accepted industry standard for broadband to support those families.
Representative Corbett?
Thank you, Larry. I want to thank you for your willingness to testify not just to this committee, but also the Rural Broadband Committee, the Rural Caucus. You've made yourself available anytime we've needed you. I just want to say thanks for what you do for Lowndes County and Moody Air Force Base. I just want to take time.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I actually know every pothole between here and Valdosta now. This is my 5th time in the last week and a half. But I appreciate you saying that.
That's very kind. That's great. So you're saying that for Representative Williams, how many buses did you get for that project?
Initially, we have 2 buses, and it has worked because what we did was we laid out the grid to identify the areas that were not being served. And by laying out this grid, we knew where to strategically place the buses. And 2 buses supplied an awful lot of coverage for those areas. Mm-hmm. It's not a permanent fix, but it's certainly on the short term for a fraction of the cost fixes it. I think eventually it's something that sometimes very important programs get shortchanged, and those that are not so important seems to have grease on their wheels. This is an issue that because of BRAC, because of the need, the state should be looking at what will it cost to supply broadband to the areas around our military installations, and it's even a no-brainer. It's $20 billion plus included here, and I submit that if a Lockheed needed something like this, we'd have already passed it out and had it working. The state needs to do a feasibility study, find out what it's going to cost, and either put up or shut up, because we funded a whole lot less important programs, you know, some of them involving fish, etc. So we can do it if we get serious.
Right. Someone had asked me earlier about One Georgia, and I don't believe that's eligible, but those are some other options to sort of loosen up some of the requirements. One Georgia is typically for private sector job creation, but sir, you're right. I think in some ways we should look at our bases as economic development, and not only as job creation, but job protection, and do the same things we do to recruit or retain a major employer.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for Mr. Hanson? Well, again, I really do appreciate you coming up and all the time, and we do plan to come down to Moody physically this summer and make a visit to the jewel of the Air Force.
Yes, sir, the crown jewel of the Air Force. We look forward to having you. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. The next item I'd like to talk about very briefly is I'd like the committee to tell the other committee members of pending bills that you're working on right now in reference to military affairs. Representative Williams.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Just as an aside note, as we completed Moody, I did want to say, even though some of the things I can see happening are not things we do right now, but we need to get out of the box. DCA was put together almost tailor-made for situations like this, but it's not anywhere on their mission. It might need to be. As the Department of Community Affairs, you know, this is what they were born for. Just a thought. House Bill 245 was dropped by me on Thursday, I believe, and House Bill 245 is a cleanup or fix-it bill for House Bill 821. Representative Frazier and I authored last year. And this bill will include teachers, spouses of active duty military people will be able to, if they're hired by the local board, begin to teach immediately under provisional status until all of the checks and all of the things that you have to do to get your permanent license gets in place. This will not prevent someone from making an application from Fort Sam Houston. I'll be at Fort Stewart X day. Like to make application. When they get here, if it sounds like a person we want to hire, we hire them, and then we begin to do the work. People don't have to sit around for months and months and months waiting on a license. Basically the same thing HB 821 does, except it definitely names and includes teachers.
Thank you, Representative Williams. And I just want to add that Representative Williams and Representative Fraser, y'all were was pioneers here in like prophets or something, oracles. You were way ahead of the power curve on this thing. And I just that's a very important bill. And a lot of bases we've gone to have said we need this, and I'm like, well, we've already done it for y'all, and you just need. So obviously, the chairman of the bases, they're on the committee, need to communicate with your base commanders to make sure that they know this bill's out there and that we've given a lot of thought to this. Representative Glanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My bill number, I believe, is House Bill 149. It is actually identical to House Bill 814 that passed the House and the Senate last year, but was tacked on to a bill that was ultimately vetoed by the governor. And not for 814, but for something else that was in that bill. And so we're bringing that bill back, and basically what that bill does is Children of Military Families Act. And what that bill does is it puts an identifier on the end of children of military families, puts an identifier at the end of their student ID number, which identifies them as military children in an effort to track the challenges that military kids have that are unique to the military community. Now, DOE already collects this data, and I've already talked to Mr. McKibben and Dr. McKibben and all those over there, and they support this bill going in again. So basically what we're doing is putting it in statute. We're codifying this process so that not only will military kids benefit from it, but it will become part of the matrix that the Department of Defense looks at when it's making determinations in regards to military bases and how friendly we are to our military community.
Well, that's a great idea, Representative Glanton. I really appreciate you doing that. I want you to know that the military, believe it or not, is tracking each and every single military child right now. They just started this program this year where they're going to try to see how educationally they do as they go to the different bases throughout their child bringing, and this is a big deal to the military, these military children. So I appreciate that. That's going to help them do that as well. Representative Keith Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But real quick, Representative Glanton, what was that bill number again?
149.
149. Okay. I'm working on something. Do not have a bill number yet. But it's going to be service cancelable student loans for STEM students who go and work as a civil servant at one of our defense installations to help them assist in recruiting the quality educated students that they need for the future missions. Working with the Georgia Student Finance Commission and trying to get some numbers from USG right now on what those numbers need to be to make it competitive as well as reasonable in our approach. So not a bill number yet, still doing the work to get the information together to make a bill.
Okay, thank you very much. Representative Prince.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I dropped a bill. It came out today. It's House Bill 242, and in concert with Representative Glanton's bill, Protecting Military. It's called Protecting Military Children, and basically what it does is it builds the communications between the Department of Family and Children Services and the family advocacy on each base. So basically, if a child is being abused, that DFACS has information on that. One of the things that it would put a requirement on DFACS to identify if that child has a parent or a guardian that's in the military. And if that is the case, then they will be required to notify the family advocacy group for that area. That way, DOD can track that child and that neglect as they move from base to base and city to city and things like that. 242.
Thank you very
242,
much,
242.
Representative Prince. Appreciate that. Anyone else? Representative Corbett.
Yes, Representative Blackman has got a bill expanding the Hope Scholarship to include the National Guard children. I don't have that bill number, but I know it's been dropped. I can get that number.
Okay, thank you very much, and that's really important. I hope you all know that military active duty children who live in Georgia do have that right to use the Hope Scholarship, even though if they're from resident of other states. We want to extend that also to reserves and in the Guard as well. Representative Williams.
Once again, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to cause any dander to rise on what I'm getting ready to say, but I've finally reached the age where really I'll be all right tonight. Hopefully everybody else will be. But it's interesting to me that military bills that directly impact our community raises very little excitement in the halls of power in this capital. When House Bill H-21 was signed, I got an afterthought that it was signed. I've seen signing ceremonies for much less important legislation. I wasn't even given the courtesy of, I'm going to sign it on Wednesday morning, can you be there? If not, just want to let you know. And here is a bill that directly impacts $4.9 billion in the region around Fort Stewart, the largest single economic impact of any post in Georgia, by the way. And if I had a $600 million impact bill with the average industry in Georgia, you'll have almost a drum and bugle corps. We take for granted the military, and we don't do anything extra. They've always been here, and where are they going? Got news for you, there are a lot of ghost towns who had the same feelings. And we don't do things, and there's some other things that have to be addressed. Representative Bill McGowan, over in Chattahoochee County, 75% of that property is military. County starving to death, and the state just says, military just stay, we'll just poo-paw it. We got to start looking at things a little differently and appreciating year-round what the military does instead of just doing BRAC. $20-some billion would get a whole lot more respect if it came from anybody but the federal government, which we figure we don't see. I can't figure out where this kind of impact gets so little respect, and because it doesn't impress me when folks stand up and shed a tear when the flag goes by and really does absolutely nothing except when the camera's around to help our military folk. I've said enough, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Williams. I agree with you completely, to be honest with you. That's why we're doing this committee. I really believe that we do take this for granted. And I think that the horizon ahead of us is going to be is rife with danger that we could lose one of our bases if we don't watch out. Representative Glanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and certainly I want to remind the members of this committee that in 2005 we lost a base that was tremendously important to Clayton County in Fort Gillem. and it devastated the local economy. Now, I recognize this is about national security, not about jobs in the community, but I believe that they go hand in hand. And so our civilian force has always been a tremendous partner for our military. Also, Mr. Chairman, want to correct, I gave you House Bill 149. It's actually House Bill 148.
Thank you, Representative Glenn. I want to talk to you about two bills that I am going to drop, and I have dropped. The first one is HB 224, and I believe this is a very easy, no-cost situation. As I remind y'all again that the military sees Georgia as not having good schools compared to the other military-rich states. So this bill would allow a military child who lives on the military base or military base off-base housing to be able to go to any school of his choice, like they do in Albany, but only within the county lines. So in other words, no local money is having to cross county lines one way or the other. The base commanders are begging for this. I don't know about Moody Air Force Base, but I know that Robbins Air Force Base in particular. So what's happening is the base has base housing that they can't fill because no one wants to live on base housing because the schools are terrible for base housing. That the zone is so if the military member who has to live on the base will actually go rent an apartment in a place where the schools are good in the county, which is ridiculous. So we would like, I'm hoping that y'all will support this for military children on base housing to be able to go to the military, any school within that county of his choice, and then have to provide the transportation to go to that school. Any questions about that? They would have to provide the transportation. The parent would. The parent, that's right, yeah. The other bill, Representative Williams.
I see the intent, and I think it's honorable, and I know what happened in Albany, but the cookie cutter approach is not effective in this situation. In Liberty County, we don't have anything close to what you're saying, because we have military schools on post that are elementary and middle, so that eliminates that completely. They go there, and once you leave post, we have 2 high schools, and since our post is dead set in the middle and right outside the gate, to say that would then just create some personal preference. I happen to like the Panthers, and I don't like the Lions, so I want to go to the Panthers. And my superintendent, my school board is dead set against it. Garrison Commander has not said he's for it, because we don't have that problem. We don't have any elementary schools and any middle schools off post, and we have 2 high schools, and they're pretty well zoned, and the diversity is terrific, and they're both about the same in grading. So I don't have the problem of being slap dab in the middle of bad schools. That's not because my post is not out in the boonies. It's dead set in the middle of the city.
Representative Elam.
I served on the school board prior to getting a demotion and having to come up here.
You can always go back.
And I tell you what, I know why you said that. See, because Al and I, we're on opposite ends of this spectrum. But let me give a little clarification. I actually did take the initiative of being a retired Marine officer and understanding and being bounced all over the world all those years. And I realized the importance of our kids being able to go to the school that we chose. Now, what happened with us is that we in Dougherty County did exactly what Mr. Chairman is recommending. We voted that anybody on the base or any dependent could go to any school they chose to in Dougherty County. Well, what we were able to do is then we created pressure on our other counties. And that was what was awesome, because very shortly after that, then Worth County and Lee County followed our lead. So I think it's very strong. I feel strongly about it. I don't want to get in any type of crosswires with my, but if we if we can ask the county to do it within themselves, then they're going to.
I've also heard it said that a lot of these local members do. I mean, and if you don't have a problem with in your county, I know actually not all of the bases have this problem. I know Moody doesn't have this problem, but some do. And some of these Board of Education members are saying to us that they need top cover from the state to be able to enact these changes because.
This top cover will apply to everybody because it's state law. That's not local law anymore. I think if you put in there, and I don't even know if this is legally done, but that should be optional. It should, state law that takes away the option, and I still say we have no elementary, no middle schools off post, and in Bryan County, we got some of the highest ranked schools in the country. So I don't need a state fix to a problem that does not exist in my district. The largest financially military force in the state. $5 billion a year. We are the largest. We ain't got that problem. So why would a state fix put us under a state law that's not a problem? If they already plans to do it, fine, they've done it. Let any other school board do just what they have done. That's not a state problem. Y'all handled your problem. And if somebody in XYZ County want to handle it, you've got the blueprint. You can go there and show them how you did it. But don't do a state mandate on something that's not a statewide problem.
Representative Clark?
Just to address that concern, you could argue too that if a certain community doesn't have the problem, then it wouldn't be utilized. If the members who are required to live on the base or who are living on the base have a school on the base that is good, they're not going to need to use or have the option. They're going to be satisfied with the option that they have, that they are zoned for, so they're not going to try to seek a choice, if I'm making sense.
Well, a lot of bases do have this problem. And the other thing is that I believe that if we told the military that we're doing this, we're trying to make a school choice situation for Georgia, that they would see more favorably about the education in Georgia.
And you could argue, too, that the perception it gives the state as being military friendly will help overall, too, that the state itself is military friendly, not just the individual installations around the state, but it will help when a BRAC comes, not just to prevent a base from being closed, but to gain the new missions when they close other missions around the world. That it would posture our state as being military friendly for the members of the military who are coming into that location. And some of the members have to live on, just as well as I do, that they have to live on the base. And so I think ultimately where we might go with this is if you're required to live on base, you have the flexibility of school choice or something like that within the county. So, and I'm speaking as somebody who this is an issue in our local area, but ultimately I think it will put the presentation of the state as a whole as being more military friendly. So, Warner Robins.
All right, is that a problem, Warner Robins?
It is something that has been discussed at large between Robbins and the school board, yes.
Y'all have got pretty highly rated public schools in Warner Robins.
No, we're very proud of our schools in Houston County.
Why is there a problem?
And it's not necessarily the quality of education always, as much as it is when the family comes in. And most of the time when you're dealing with members who are required to live on the base, they're a little older, they've been in the military a while, so they've built ranked, and now they're in a position where their kids are late elementary, early middle school, somewhere maybe even high school area. So they're coming in with other curricular activities, not just the quality of the education, but there might have been on a certain kind of track, or especially in high school, they might have been taking a certain foreign language at one school, and then they come in and the school they're zoned for doesn't have German, and the school across town might have German, and so they would like to be able to put their kid in a school that has German. Or they're taking some, they might be in some kind of extracurricular activity that isn't offered at one school that is at another, and they're trying to, when they come in, their kids are already doing these things, and so it's not always about the quality of education as much as it is matching up the education history that their students have with the school in that area that best suits their background that they're coming in with.
Representative Glanton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm gonna kind of, being a preacher, I'm gonna split the baby here. I agree with Representative Williams in regards to I have some concern about making something mandatory and to make folks deal with an issue that they don't have. But on the other side, I see the justification for doing it because, for instance, School A may not have ROTC, and School B may have it. And many of us military parents want our children to participate in ROTC, both in high school and college. My daughter's in ROTC now. And so if I were mandated by order to come to Georgia to a particular base, certainly my children are not on, they didn't choose to come here. And so we ought to be able to put them in a place where they and we think that they can be successful. So I can see it both ways.
Okay, we're one more comment, and then we'll close this up. Representative Corbett?
I yield.
Representative Williams?
My question is, and let me just say this. In my county, and I have to speak to my county because you're messing with something, you're trying to fix something in my county that is not broke. When you are given orders to come to Fort Stewart, Georgia, most of my housing is less than 20 years old. I'm a realtor, and I show you a list of houses. That's your choice time. I'm going to buy a house because I want to go to Liberty High. Got plenty of houses. I'm going to buy a house over here because I want to go to Bradwell. That's a problem that's fixed without legislation. We have the housing patterns already. We have not got an old housing area in my entire county. So why do I need that when I come with this special kid and they say, I got a program at Bradwell, I'm buy a house in the Bradwell schools zone. That's all I got to do. Then I ain't got no problem.
Just very briefly, Representative Williams.
Two things on that. One being, some members are required to live on base. They don't have to. They don't get to choose. I mean, exactly. I mean, so what we're talking about on one hand could be a very limited number of students when they're key and essential members of the military and they have no choice about where they can live. The commander of the base, when he comes in, he's told what house he's moving into. And so they don't have that flexibility of real estate options. And like the chairman said, sometimes people rent an apartment in the school zone just so they can have that option. But the second thing about that is when you start looking at other maybe not key and essential members, you're looking at NCOs who might be young and they have kids, and so they don't have a lot of, their pay is not great. And they might not be able to afford to get into that better, because normally your better schools have a better, higher rated, it's just more expensive, and they might not be able to afford it to move into that school zone. So they're restricted by financial options in that situation. So I think the main thing for me is the key and essential. They're required to live on the base. They have no choice. They are told what house they're going to move into on that base when they're put on station.
And Representative Elam for the last comment.
Actually, I have a question. I don't understand this quite yet. Your sources of money are three major sources. You have your local funds, mostly from your tax property. You have your state FTE dollars, and you have your federal dollars. Now, in your bill, can you explain to me how that's going to work? And I can tell you how we did it in Dougherty County and how it's done here. What's
The money would not be moved at all because it stays in that county.
okay?
So no money's being moved.
Okay, so
But it would have to follow the schools, it'd have to follow the child.
okay, so
Your state money would have to go if you was in, say, Lowndes County or Valdosta.
But it's going to that county anyway.
okay, so okay, so yeah, okay, so there's no transfer.
No,
Okay.
no money's being moved. Yeah. All we're saying is that the child has a choice of what school he wants to get in that district. Okay, let's move on to the next subject. I think we got that one cleared away. Read that pretty good. I want you to look very briefly at this statement. This piece of paper I showed y'all says it starts off with Vice Chiefs push for new round of military base closures. I get one of these about every day. I just wanted you to share with you. The third paragraph, it's real money that we really need to reinvest into deferred maintenance and infrastructure backlog, said General Daniel Allen, the Army Vice Chief, told Armed Forces Service Committee. So this is another example of the Pentagon and the Congress. Congress, all throughout this time, the last 4 or 5 years, Congress has said, we do not want Iraq, we do not want Iraq, we do not want Iraq. Well, now they're changing their tune. On the second page, there's a quote by John McCain in the third paragraph. Senator Reid and I seriously considered the issue of Iraq and obviously want to talk about now Secretary of Defense about it. So this is, again, and then the next paragraph down is talking from the Representative Mac Thornberry from the chairman of House's Armed Services Committee. So the Senate and the House, Republicans and Democrats, and the President are all talking about doing Iraq. So I just want to hope to share that with you, so you'll share it with your committee members around your bases. That this is, I think, more, to me, this is a train that is coming. It's not if this is coming, this is coming. And as you know, once the Iraq is announced, it's too late to decide we're going to fix things. This is the time to fix things is now. And once the Iraq is announced, it's past time. The last thing I want to talk about very briefly is I want your opinion, to be honest with you, on the next piece of paper. Says recent initiatives to help Georgia bases. I want the committee to look at this 4-page document and tell me what you think about our posture in Georgia at this point. The first page is a very list of things, very brief list of things that we have done in Georgia recently. It's notable that the U.S. has put, $2.3 billion into Georgia just in contracts in the last 2 years. This is not, yearly it's $20 billion, but just this year alone, they put an additional $2.3 billion, most of it at Fort Gordon. We put about $41 million, and the locals have put about $41 million. The second page is the request we saw from the different bases. The M and R, that's Moody, Robbins. B is for Benning. S is for Stewart. For the things that they requested us. The third page talks about the educational rankings amongst the other states. Virginia's seventh in the nation in education. Florida's 14th. North Carolina's 19th. Texas is 21st. We're sitting at 35th. And that's why it really, amongst those top 5 states, we're at the bottom. And that's why I'm very, very concerned that our K-12 education is going to be used as a something against us. And the last page, or the fourth page, is money that you've seen this chart before, but I want to discuss it. It's basically in order of how big the base is, starting with Fort Stewart, Benning, then Robbins, then Gordon, Albany, the Guard, Kings Bay, Moody, and then Dobbins. And the investments, there's 3 columns there. There's the federal investments that they put in. There's what Georgia has put in over the last couple of years, and then what private companies have been put in. The private companies, most of it has been Georgia Power. Georgia Power has put $80 million into 5 different bases for solar farms. And then the last page I think is the most important, is recent states' investments in the military at the bottom. Texas puts $30 million a year in their annual budget to protect their bases. Lately they put $657 million into state money into infrastructure. Maryland puts $5 million a year into mostly to do BRAC zones, to protect the easements around the bases. They recently put $500 million in state and local money into infrastructure. Florida does $3 million a year. They recently bought a $14 million office building in Orlando. So I would like your opinion on where we stand as Georgians. Are we doing enough, or are we not doing enough, or should our efforts be better placed? Representative Williams.
We certainly, all of us on the committee heard all summer. There's an indication, and some people said it a little differently, but we need a permanent office funded properly by the state to do the kind of things that Texas, Florida, and some others are doing, where we won't have to play so much catch up when BRAC rolls around. It should be just almost automatic. To Representative Glanton's point earlier on Fort Gillum, during that round of closures, we also lost, arguably, the third highest profile base in America, next to the Central Command West Point, probably FORSCOM. My goodness, 13 general officers, and who would have thought? Everybody said, well, they got to be safe because they got 13 general officers, 4-star, and every other star that you can come with, and they were right off the chopping block. That lost us prestige a whole lot more than it lost us money. We need a full-time commission, office run by executive director, to do the things that we need to do all the time.
Well, that's a very good point. And just for the audience, if you don't know, Fort Gillum was FORSCOM. They had 13 generals at Fort Gillum. I'm sorry, McPherson. Sorry, and they're gone. They're in North Carolina, and that means those generals are not pushing for Georgia anymore. They're pushing for North Carolina. So that is a very, very significant thing. On the last page, the first 2 points on the when I said other states' investment in the military, I'll note here that 70% of states have organizations dedicated to the protection of their bases. 8 new states in the past few years. We basically do not have one right now that is functional. The second point, 80% of states spend money from annual budget to protect their bases. Georgia does not. So we're in the bottom 20% there. That's right. 80%, that's right. 62% spend about $500,000 a year, about 24% spend about $1 million a year, and about 28% spend up to $2 million a year. Any comments, Representative Keith Clark?
Just to go on that, though, looking back on page 1, you had where's page 1? That Georgia spent $41 million. Yeah, we just also appropriated $50 million in the small budget, the little budget. Didn't we do another $50 million?
We did.
For,
That's right.
For Fort Gordon and to go along with that cyber command. And so, to me, the concern isn't so much as having an annual line item, but I mean, I would like to have something like a grant fund, a small block grant fund, that the communities know that they can go and pitch their ideas to get. But we are spending some money, and
And that is exactly right. You know,
right.
we are. Okay, I didn't realize we had another meeting coming here at 1 o'clock at 3:30. So we will continue the discussion. But if you would please, committee members, look at those documents I gave you, and let's be ready to talk about them at the next meeting about what we need to prioritize ourselves on. Thank you very much.